Tens of thousands of years ago, when darkness ruled the earth and humanity trembled before the cold winds and wild beasts, there lived a young man who bore the rugged face of a seasoned warrior. In a shadowed forest where death lurked behind every tree, he made a choice no one had dared before: to defy the darkness with nothing but his bare hands. Karuk, a name that would be etched into the memory of mankind, stepped away from his tribe, away from the fear that bound them. He carried no weapons, no magic, only an unbreakable will. In a breathless battle between life and death, Karuk set out to find what humanity had never seen before: light. But this journey was no simple task. Amid the howls of the deep woods and the blood that stained his hands, could one man alone conquer the merciless forces of nature? Could he spark the miracle that would one day be known by a sacred name: fire? You're about to embark on a wild, dangerous, and extraordinary story where every breath could be the last. Where are you watching from? Share with us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more inspiring stories like this one. Now, let's begin. Long ago, in a time when darkness reigned supreme and the stars were the only witnesses to human suffering, there was a cold unlike any you could ever imagine. It wasn't just the bite of winter that tore at your flesh. It was a deeper, hungrier cold, the kind that gnawed at your very soul, whispering that survival was nothing but a cruel joke. We were fragile, shivering creatures back then, huddled together under threadbare coverings made of animal hides, pressed close for what little warmth our trembling bodies could give. Every gust of wind that howled through the trees was like the sneering laughter of death itself. And yet, somehow, we clung to life. My name is Karuk. I had survived 25 winters, a rare feat when many never saw 20, but life had carved me deep. The years had etched themselves onto my face and my body, aging me beyond my count of seasons. I wore the face of a man 10 years older, my muscles worn by endless hunts, my eyes dulled by too many losses. I carried the heavy silence of those who have buried too many friends. That night, as the sky bled purple and black, and mist crept like cold fingers across the earth, our people gathered in a hollow beneath the trees. Our fire was gone. Our last ember had flickered out days ago, snuffed by a rainstorm we hadn't been strong enough to resist. And with it, hope seemed to vanish too. Children whimpered. Mothers whispered prayers to gods who had long stopped listening. The old ones simply stared ahead, hollow-eyed, already halfway gone. I sat among them, silent, feeling the same gnawing despair claw at my insides, and yet, somewhere deeper, buried beneath the ice that crusted my heart, there was a stubborn ember still alive, a voice inside me that hissed, "Do something, anything." It wasn't bravery, it wasn't heroism, it was pure, desperate defiance. The kind of defiance that only comes when every other road leads to death. Without a word, I rose to my feet. Heads turned sluggishly to follow me, but no one spoke. Maybe they thought I was walking to my end, like so many before me. Maybe, deep down, they knew something was different. The woods loomed before me, black and thick as tar. Every instinct screamed at me to stay, to huddle in the miserable safety of the others. But survival had never belonged to the timid. I stepped into the trees. The forest was alive with dangers I could not see. Predators lurking behind every trunk, every shadow a mouth waiting to devour me. But worse than the beasts was the sheer suffocating loneliness that pressed against my ribs like a vice. Still, I pressed on. I knew, somehow, what I was looking for, even if I couldn't name it. A way to call down the sun, to trap the stars in my hands. A way to make light. I found a clearing beneath a twisted old tree, its roots clawing the ground like frozen serpents. There I gathered stones. Sharp, hard stones that felt ancient and wise in my calloused hands. I tore branches from dead trees, my fingers raw and bleeding. I dropped to my knees, the earth cold and unyielding beneath me. And then I began. Strike, strike, strike. The stones clashed together in my fists, each impact jarring up my arms, vibrating my bones. Sparks flickered, tiny, pathetic things, and died in the damp air. Sweat froze on my skin. My hands, already torn and battered, bled freely now. Pain lanced through my knuckles with every blow, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop, because somewhere, deep inside my chest, I carried a truth larger than the fear, larger than the cold. We were meant for more than dying in the dark. Tears blurred my vision. Tears of rage, of grief, of stubborn, irrational hope. Again and again, I smashed the stones together, each strike an act of rebellion against the cruelty of the world. And then, a spark caught. It landed in the shredded fibers of the kindling I had made, a faint wisp of smoke curling upward, delicate as a newborn breath. My heart stopped. Slowly, reverently, I leaned close and blew. The ember grew, eating hungrily at the dry fibers. The smoke thickened, turned black, then orange, and suddenly, life erupted. A flame, small and fierce, flickered into existence between my trembling hands. I gasped, stumbling back, awe crashing over me like a wave. I had done it. I had ripped light from the belly of the world. I crouched there, bathed in the warm golden glow of the tiny fire, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to create, not just survive. My body ached. My blood stained the ground. But in that moment, I was the richest man alive. Tomorrow, I would bring this miracle back to the others. But tonight, the fire and I were alone, two survivors wrapped in the oldest kind of magic. The fire danced before me, its golden tendrils reaching upward like hands grasping at the stars. I watched, transfixed, as the tiny flames licked the night air, casting trembling shadows against the gnarled trees. It was a living thing, a child of earth and breath and stubbornness. But as the minutes dragged by, wonder slowly gave way to something colder. Fear. I couldn't stay here, not alone, not for long. Already the forest was stirring. The beasts of the dark, wolves, saber-tooths, worse things without names. They would see the fire, they would smell it, and they would come. I had to move. I had to bring the miracle back to my people. I had to keep it alive. I wrapped the flame carefully, cradling it in a hollowed piece of bark lined with dry moss. The fire sputtered, angry at being tamed, but it clung to the fuel. I secured the bundle with trembling fingers, whispering to it like it was a newborn I was afraid to break. "Stay with me," I murmured, voice cracking with emotion. "Stay alive." The journey back to the tribe was no simple path. Every step through the dark woods was a gamble against death. The fire's faint glow lit only inches ahead, enough to trip over roots and stumble through thorns, but not enough to see what waited beyond. The forest was different now. Before, it had been a place of indifference. Cruel, yes, but mindless. Now it felt alive, watching, hunting. Every snapped twig made my heart hammer against my ribs, Every gust of wind that made the trees groan sent shivers racing down my spine. At one point, I heard a low growl too close. A pair of yellow eyes blinked open in the underbrush. I froze, holding the fire close to my chest, shielding it with my body. For a breathless moment, predator and prey stared at each other, and for once, I was not the prey. The creature, some ancient cat with muscles coiled like springs, crept closer. I did the only thing I could think to do. I showed it the fire. The flames crackled and hissed, spitting tiny embers into the air. The beast snarled, flattened its ears, and, miraculously, backed away into the shadows. I staggered forward, disbelief flooding through me. For the first time, man had faced the wild, and the wild had blinked first. It was not just warmth I carried. It was not just survival. It was power. The realization sent a surge of awe and terror through my veins. The fire was not my servant. It was a dangerous living spirit, and I had to earn its loyalty every moment. Hours dragged by in a haze of pain and determination. Branches tore at my skin. My feet bled from unseen stones, but I did not stop. Not until I saw it, the hollow where my people huddled, barely visible in the thin moonlight. I stumbled into the clearing, gasping, half collapsing onto my knees. The tribe stirred, murmuring in confusion and fear. Children clung to their mothers. Hunters reached for spears, their faces tense, suspicious. Even the elders, wrapped in furs and silence, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. I must have looked like a madman. Filthy, bleeding, cradling a scrap of smoking bark like it was treasure. But I didn't speak, not yet. Instead, I knelt in the center of them all and gently, reverently, fed the flame. Dry grass, thin twigs, the fire sputtered, hissed, then caught. A gasp rippled through the gathered crowd as the flames rose higher, casting a warm, living light over faces starved for hope. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed. Then a low sound broke the silence, not fear, not anger, a weeping. It was old Garin, the oldest among us, who fell to his knees first. His hands, crippled with age, reached out tremblingly toward the fire. Tears cut tracks down his leathery cheeks as he whispered, "The gods have answered." I wanted to tell him, "No, old one, the gods had nothing to do with it. It was stubbornness. It was hunger. It was rage at a world that wanted us to die in the dark." But I said nothing. Some things are better left unspoken. One by one, the others followed Garen's lead, kneeling before the fire, reaching out their hands for the warmth they had thought lost forever. The children laughed, a high, clear sound that shattered the heavy silence. The hunters lowered their weapons, exchanging looks of wonder. And me? I just sat there, too exhausted to speak, watching the flames grow stronger with each breath, each offering. I didn't need to say anything. The fire spoke for me. It whispered of a new dawn, of battles yet to come, of a destiny that no one, not beast, not storm, not even death, could take away. In the dancing light, our future was being born. The fire grew, small at first, a timid heartbeat in the vast blackness, but alive. It cracked and popped in the cool night air, casting golden light on faces that had long forgotten what warmth looked like. The people gathered closer, their movements hesitant, almost reverent. It was as if they were afraid the fire would vanish if they breathed too loudly or stepped too harshly. I watched them, feeling a strange mix of pride and fear churn in my chest. This was no longer just about survival. Something much bigger had been set into motion, something none of us fully understood yet. I glanced down at my bloodied hands, the cuts raw and angry. These hands had wrenched light from stone and breath, but I knew, deep down, I hadn't truly conquered anything. I had negotiated with nature. I had whispered, begged, bled, until stone and wood agreed to give me their secret. And secrets, once given, demand stewardship. They demand respect. The elders began to murmur among themselves, their voices low, weaving fear and hope into the heavy night air. Some saw me as a messenger of the spirits. Others, I could see it in their narrowed eyes, saw me as a danger, a disruptor. Change has never been welcomed with open arms, not even by those who need it most. Among the whispers, one voice rose clearer than the others. Maruk, a heavy-set hunter known more for his fists than his mind. He pointed at me, his face twisted in uncertainty. "What trickery is this, Karuk?" he barked, stepping forward. "This is not natural. It is not ours." The firelight danced across his broad shoulders, making him look larger, more menacing. I rose slowly to my feet, my body aching in protest. I met his gaze without flinching. "It is ours now," I said, my voice steady but soft, like the steady pull of a river against rock. "I did not steal it. I found it. I bled for it." For a moment, only the crackle of the flames filled the space between us. The others watched, holding their breath. Maruk grunted, scowling, but said nothing more. Instead, he dropped heavily to the ground beside the fire, warming his calloused hands. A silent surrender. I turned away from him and crouched near the fire once more. There was still much to do. Without proper care, the fire would die as quickly as it had been born. I needed more fuel. I needed a home for it. Something better than a nest of dry twigs. I reached for larger branches, arranging them carefully, feeding the flames slowly, patiently. Each stick, each breath of encouragement was a conversation between me and this fragile, ferocious thing we had created. The fire responded eagerly, growing brighter, warmer. Children crept closer now, their faces glowing with awe. Little Mira, no more than 5 winters old, edged near me, her wide eyes reflecting the flames. "Is it alive?" she whispered, clutching a worn piece of fur to her chest. I smiled, a slow, tired smile that cracked my chapped lips. "Yes," I said softly, "it is alive, and it needs us, just as we need it." Her small mouth formed a perfect O of wonder, and she scampered back to her mother, repeating my words excitedly. Around us, the mood shifted, subtly but undeniably. The fear, the suspicion, it didn't disappear entirely, but it began to soften, to give way to something else. Curiosity, hope, possibility. The tribe began moving with purpose again, gathering wood, building small piles near the heart of the fire. They offered scraps of bark, twigs, dry grasses, feeding the flame like some sacred ritual. It was not worship, it was gratitude, a silent agreement between man and the wild forces that had, for once, decided to show mercy. As I worked alongside them, binding sticks, directing where the fire would stretch next, I couldn't help but feel it deep within my bones. We had crossed a threshold. We were no longer at the mercy of the world. We had, for the first time, negotiated with it, not as conquerors, but as partners. The night wore on, but none of us slept. How could we? There was too much to see, too much to feel. Old Garin, still kneeling near the fire, sang a low, trembling song, a song so old that even he likely didn't remember its meaning. It was the sound of memory, of survival, passed down through blood and bone. Beside him, mothers braided their children's hair, whispering that the night was no longer something to fear, that tomorrow would come, that it would be better than today. For the first time in longer than anyone could remember, there was laughter. Not the forced, brittle laughter of fear, but real laughter, bright and defiant and sweet as ripe fruit. And in the heart of it all, the fire blazed, fierce and proud, a symbol of everything we could be. Not slaves to the cold, not victims of the dark, but creators, dreamers, survivors. And I, Karuk, the boy who looked like an old man, sat silently and listened to the crackling whispers of stone and wood, whispers that spoke not of endings, but of beginnings. The fire had changed us. There was no denying it any more. Where once we had huddled in fear, whispering prayers into an empty sky, now we sat taller, spoke louder. Hope crackled in the air alongside the flames, a fragile, newborn thing learning to stretch its wings. But hope, like fire, has a shadow. It didn't take long for the questions to come. At first, they were whispered, nervous, cautious. A glance exchanged between two hunters, a furrowed brow from one of the elders. Small, almost invisible fractures running through the new foundation we were so desperate to build. I heard them at night when they thought I was sleeping. Why did Karuk bring it to us now? One voice murmured, sharp with suspicion. Why not before, when the rains first came? Another, harsher, what price will the spirits demand for this gift? And the one that stung the most, the one that buried itself deep under my skin. Who gave him the right? I couldn't blame them, not really. Fear is a stubborn beast. Even when you feed it hope, it still howls in the dark corners of your heart. Still, the doubt gnawed at me, sharper, crueler than any wound I had taken from the hunt. Had I done the right thing? I looked at the fire, steady and strong now, built high with thick logs surrounded by stones to cradle its hunger. It didn't seem evil. It didn't whisper dark promises. It simply was. A tool. A choice. And maybe that's what terrified them most, that, for the first time, we had been given power, real power, and no one, not even the oldest among us, knew what it meant. One night, when the moon was nothing but a sliver of broken silver in the sky, Maruk approached me. His heavy footsteps crunched the dry earth. He stood there for a long moment, silent, the fire casting his face into hard lines and deeper shadows. You brought us this, he said finally, voice low and rough, and with it, you brought change. I nodded, waiting. Maruk shifted his weight, uneasy. You think change is good, he said, almost accusingly. But change is dangerous. It wakes the things that sleep. It calls to the beasts, to the storms. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, but because some truths are too heavy to lift with words alone. Instead, I said quietly, the beasts were always coming, Maruk. The storms were always brewing. The fire doesn't summon them. It shows us we don't have to face them crawling in the mud. He stared at me for a long time. And then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. That was the way of it with Maruk. No declarations, no promises, only silence, heavier than anger, sharper than hate. I sat by the fire, staring into its heart, feeling its warmth seep into my battered bones. I thought of Mira. The little girl with wonder-filled eyes, of old Garin, whose voice trembled with ancient songs, of the mothers who braided their children's hair by firelight, whispering stories of a better world. For them, I would endure the doubt. For them, I would carry this burden, even if it cost me everything. Morning came slowly, bleeding pale gold over the treetops. The air was crisp, clean, filled with the scent of dew and smoke. The tribe stirred, gathering around the dying embers. There was work to do, wood to gather, food to hunt. But something had shifted overnight, something delicate and dangerous. Maruk wasn't the only one who feared what the fire represented. Whispers had woven their way into the camp like smoke, that the spirits would be angry, that Karuk had stolen something sacred, that the fire would bring death. I saw it in the way they looked at me now, not just with awe, but with suspicion, a sliver of distance that hadn't been there before. And yet, when I rose and added fresh wood to the fire, no one stopped me. When I showed the young ones how to coax the embers back to life, how to breathe gently into the kindling without suffocating it, they crowded close, eager to learn. The fear was real, but so was the hunger for knowledge, for survival, for something more. It would not be an easy road. Change never is. But as I watched Mira carefully feed a small twig into the flames, her face alight with fierce determination, I knew we could not turn back, even if the spirits raged, even if the beasts came, even if the storms tore us apart. The fire was ours now, and we would either rise with it or fall because of it. There was no other path. The days that followed were full of small miracles. Our fire never died. Each night it burned a little brighter, casting its warmth over our circle of rough shelters, driving the cold a little further away. Children slept through the night without crying. Hunters returned with more game, emboldened by the protection the fire seemed to promise. For the first time in what felt like forever, laughter became common, not rare. And yet, beneath that fragile joy, unease still smoldered, like dry grass waiting for the spark of a careless flame. It was Maruk who fanned that spark. In every gathering, he lingered at the edges, speaking in low, urgent tones. I never caught the full words, but I saw the glances. Sharp, wary, distrustful. The fire had not yet burned away our fear of change. If anything, it had only made that fear grow teeth. Still, I chose to believe, perhaps foolishly, that what we were building was stronger than whispers. I kept teaching, kept showing the young ones how to tend the flames, how to honor it without letting it consume them. I watched little Mira's clumsy hands strike flint against stone, her face lit with determination. I heard old Garin hum ancient songs now, mixed with the crackle of burning logs, and I told myself, we will endure, but I had forgotten the oldest lesson of the world. Hope is always tested by fire. The storm struck without warning. One moment, the evening was calm, the air thick with the scent of pine and wet soil. The next, the sky tore open in a roar of wind and water, a monstrous force that swallowed the stars whole. The fire sputtered violently as the first raindrops hit, hissing and flaring in protest. Panic rippled through the tribe. Mothers screamed for their children. Hunters scrambled, desperate to shield the flame with hides and branches. I threw myself into the fray, shouting orders above the howling winds. Cover the pit! Feed it dry wood! Keep it breathing! But the storm was no mindless enemy. It was precise. It lashed and tore at everything we had built, driving icy rain into the heart of the fire with merciless precision. For the first terrifying moment since I had birthed it, the fire looked fragile again, a shivering child before an oncoming wave. Maruk stood apart from the rest, arms crossed, his face carved into a mask of grim satisfaction. I saw him through the sheets of rain, saw the dangerous gleam in his eyes, and understood. To him, this was not just a storm. It was proof that I had brought a curse upon us. The fire guttered low, licking desperately at the soaked wood. It needed more. It needed protection. I grabbed the largest branch I could find, slamming it into the pit, sparks erupting against the dark. "Help me!" I roared. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, one by one, hands joined mine. Mira, soaked and shivering but fierce, old Garen, his body trembling with the effort, even two younger hunters who had once doubted me. Together, we built a barrier against the storm, our bodies shielding the precious embers. We became the fire's armor. We fought not just for warmth, not just for survival, but for the right to believe in something bigger than fear. For endless minutes we battled the wind and rain. Every muscle burned, every heartbeat screamed. But slowly, impossibly, the fire began to recover. Tiny tendrils of flame climbed the wood, defying the storm's fury. The pit glowed again, stubborn and golden in the darkness. A cry rose from the tribe, half victory, half desperate prayer, and in that moment, something inside all of us shifted. We had faced the storm together. We had chosen to fight for the fragile light instead of surrendering to the comfort of old fears. We had, for the first time, truly become more than a group of scared survivors. We had become a tribe of fire-bearers. The storm raged for hours longer, but it no longer owned us. We huddled close, guarding the flame, feeding it whenever it faltered. Even Marek, scowling and bitter, could not deny what he saw. Not words, not whispers, only the undeniable truth of survival against the odds. When dawn finally broke, pale and trembling over the battered trees, we emerged blinking into the wreckage. Branches lay scattered like bones. Shelters had collapsed. The ground was churned into thick, sucking mud. But at the center of it all, the fire still burned. And so did we. The storm had broken us, and yet, strangely, it had also bound us closer than ever before. In the days that followed, the tribe moved like a single living thing, repairing what was broken, gathering what was scattered, rebuilding what the storm had tried to take away. Every dawn began with the crackle of the fire. Every night ended with its warm light casting tall, hopeful shadows against the trees. But even as our bodies healed, something darker had begun to fester in the corners of our small world, something no amount of work could repair. Jealousy. It crept in quietly, like smoke beneath a door. At first it was small, a sharp look when I taught a boy how to spark flint, a muttered complaint when I showed a mother how to keep the fire fed without smothering it. It grew worse when Mira, small and fearless, managed to start a tiny flame by herself, her face lit with a pride so pure it made my throat ache. There were murmurs then, low and bitter. Why should the fire only answer to Karuk's teachings? Why should he decide who touches the flame? The worst of it came from Maruk. He watched every lesson with narrowed eyes, his arms crossed tight across his massive chest. He said little, but when he did speak, his words were sharp enough to draw blood. "Perhaps the fire is not meant for everyone," he said one evening, loud enough for the gathered hunters to hear. Perhaps it chooses favorites. Perhaps it should belong to the strongest. The strongest. Not the wisest, not the kindest, the strongest. I met his gaze across the firelight, and for the first time I saw not just doubt in his eyes, but hunger. A hunger for power, for control. The fire had given us warmth, safety, hope, but it had also given birth to a new, more dangerous hunger. The desire to own what should have been shared. I tried to push the worry aside, tried to remind myself that the tribe had faced worse than jealousy before. But I couldn't deny the truth gnawing at the edges of my heart. The fire had changed more than just the coldness of our nights. It had changed us. One morning, as the mist still clung stubbornly to the ground, I found Maruk crouched near the fire pit, alone. He held a thick branch in his calloused hands, poking at the embers with a force that made me flinch. The flames hissed and shied away from his rough treatment. "You'll smother it," I said quietly, stepping closer. He didn't look up. Instead, he jabbed harder, scattering ash into the air. "It listens to you," he said, his voice a low growl. "But it ignores me." "It doesn't listen to me," I said, choosing my words carefully. "It listens to anyone who respects it." He finally turned, and the raw bitterness on his face made my stomach twist. "You think you're better than us because you found it first," he spat. "You think you own the fire." I shook my head, my voice soft but firm. "No one owns it, Maruk. The fire is a gift, not a weapon, not a throne." He sneered. "A gift or a leash?" Without another word, he stalked off into the woods, leaving the embers sputtering behind him. The tension grew thicker with each passing day. Where once there had been songs, there was now only tense silence. Where once children had played freely near the fire, now their mothers kept them close, casting wary glances at the hunters gathered in tight, whispering knots. The fire still burned, strong, steady, beautiful, but around it, our community had begun to fracture. Old Garin sensed it too. One night, as we sat alone by the flames, he spoke, his voice barely more than a brittle whisper. "You brought us a great gift, Karuk," he said, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "But you also brought choice, and choice, my son, choice is heavier than any stone." I stared into the embers, feeling the truth of his words settle heavy in my chest. Had I truly understood what I had unleashed? The fire had given us power, the power to survive, to thrive. But it had also given each of us a new question to answer. What will you do with it? Serve it, or use it? Honor it, or claim it? As the flames danced higher into the night, I knew one thing for certain. The hardest battles were yet to come. And they would not be fought against storms or wild beasts. They would be fought here, in the hearts of men, in the quiet, treacherous space where jealousy blooms. The fire had become our heart, our protector, our promise to tomorrow. But even a heart can be broken. The unease that had slithered through the tribe for days finally took shape, solid and terrible, under the pale, indifferent gaze of the stars. It happened just after midnight. The camp lay silent, save for the occasional crackle of the fire and the soft sighs of sleeping children. The embers pulsed low and steady, breathing in time with the slumbering world. I was awake. I often was these days, not because of fear, but because of the weight of all that we had built and the fragile knowledge of how easily it could be lost. That night the air tasted wrong, sharp, bitter, like the moment before a branch snaps. Instinct pulled me from my resting place, barefoot, silent, I moved through the shadows, every sense stretched taut. That's when I saw them. Maruk and two others, strong hunters I had once called brothers, crouched near the fire. Their movements were furtive, their hands quick and clumsy. In Maruk's grip was a heavy sack blackened with wet earth, and without hesitation he hurled it into the heart of the flame. A scream of steam and smoke tore through the night. The fire hissed violently, shrinking back from the sudden assault. I rushed forward, my voice raw. "What are you doing?" Maruk turned, and for the first time, he didn't hide the snarl twisting his face. "Setting us free," he spat, "from your rule, from your cursed flame." The others stood behind him, uncertain, their eyes darting between the dying fire and my outstretched hands. "You fool!" I roared, grief and rage tangled in my throat. "The fire is not mine to rule. It's all of ours. It is life." But the damage had been done. The sack, soaked with water and rot, had smothered the delicate balance of the fire. Only a few stubborn embers clung to life, flickering feebly beneath the smoke. Around us, the tribe stirred awake, confusion giving way to horror as they saw the fading light. Old Garin stumbled toward us, his voice cracking. "What madness is this?" Mark squared his shoulders, his voice rising over the chaos. "No more will we bow to Karuk's fire. No more will we be chained to his ways." He turned to the tribe, his arms spread wide, a savage gleam in his eyes. "We are hunters, warriors. We do not need a spark to save us. We save ourselves." There was a terrible silence, the kind that hangs heavy before a breaking. I looked around, at Mira, clutching her mother's hand, tears brimming in her wide eyes, at the hunters, torn between fear and loyalty, at the fire, dying in the dirt like a wounded animal. And I understood something deep and cutting. Sometimes the greatest threat to a people isn't the cold, or the beasts, or the storms. It's the fear inside their own hearts. Maruk had given voice to that fear, and fear is a wildfire more destructive than any rain could ever extinguish. Without thinking, I dropped to my knees beside the smothered fire. Gently, with hands that trembled, I scraped back the wet muck, searching, praying, there. A coal, no bigger than a fingernail, still glowing, still alive. I cupped my hands around it, sheltering it from the biting wind. I blew, slow and steady, my breath a whispered prayer into the night. Behind me, the tribe watched, frozen, breathless. Even Marek hesitated, as if some small part of him still believed. The ember flared. Once, twice, a flicker, a gasp, and then a flame. Small, fragile, but burning. The tribe erupted, not with cheers but with a raw, aching sound, hope clawing its way back from the brink of despair. I fed the flame with trembling hands, building it slowly, patiently, until it stretched and yawned, spilling warmth back into the shivering night. Maruk stood there, frozen in place, a man caught between rage and realization. Slowly, the others turned away from him, gathering around the reborn fire. Not with anger, not with violence, with choice. They chose the fire. They chose life. And in that silent, painful moment, Marek realized he had lost not just the flame, but the soul of the tribe. Without a word, he turned and vanished into the woods, swallowed by the darkness he had chosen over the light. I sat there long after he was gone, the fire crackling beside me. I wasn't proud. I wasn't triumphant. I was tired. Bone deep, soul worn tired. Because I understood now, The greatest miracles must be protected, not just from the world, but from within. And every fire, no matter how fiercely it burns, will always need a guardian. Someone willing to bleed for it. Someone willing to believe in it, even when no one else does. Someone stubborn enough to build it back, ember by ember, when others would let it die. The night after Maruk's betrayal was the quietest I had ever known. Not the peaceful quiet of a safe camp, not the comfort and hush of a world asleep. It was the heavy, aching quiet of wounds too deep for words. The fire burned low, a single tendril of smoke curling toward the stars. Most of the tribe had returned to their shelters, exhausted, not by the storm, but by the choice they had been forced to make. Only a few remained by the fire. Old Garan, sitting with his hands folded in his lap, little Mira, curled up against her mother's side, her small face tight with confusion and sadness, and me, Karuk, the one who had lit the first flame and now felt more alone than I had before it had ever existed. I stared into the embers, my mind a mess of tangled emotions, anger at Maruk's cruelty, grief for the trust that had been shattered, guilt, sharp and relentless, gnawing at me. Had I been too proud, too blind? Had I mistaken hope for certainty and dragged my people into a fight they weren't ready for? A soft sound broke my spiraling thoughts, a shuffle of feet on damp earth. It was Garan. He lowered himself slowly beside me, his old bones cracking like dry branches. For a long moment he said nothing, only watched the fire with his deep, clouded eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice a coarse whisper. "Forgiveness," he said, almost to himself, is heavier to carry than hatred. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. He turned his head slightly, the firelight tracing the deep lines of his face. "You are angry," he said simply, "as you should be." I swallowed hard, my throat burning. "He tried to destroy everything," I rasped. Garan nodded. "And he failed." He leaned forward, poking gently at the coals with a thin stick, coaxing a tiny flare of brightness. "But the fire is not just what you see here," he said softly. "It is here." He tapped his gnarled fingers against his chest. "And here." He tapped the ground beneath us. "It lives because you taught us to believe in it." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his words settle into the cracks inside me. Belief. Not fire, not wood, not even survival itself, but belief. That was what Maruk had tried to smother, and that was what had refused to die. By the time the sun rose, pale and tentative behind a veil of mist, a new resolve had begun to stir within me. Not anger, not revenge, but something stronger. Forgiveness. Not because Maruk deserved it, but because we did. We deserved the chance to heal without carrying the poison of bitterness. We deserved to build something better, not just with our hands, but with our hearts. Later that morning, I gathered the tribe around the fire. Their faces were weary, wary, still bruised by betrayal, still tender with fear. I stood before them, my voice steady but rough-edged. "Maruk is gone," I said. "He chose his path." I let the words hang there, heavy with all they meant. But we are still here. And the fire is still here. I knelt by the flames, feeding them gently with dry kindling, the fire crackling in gratitude. "We will not let one man's fear define us," I continued. "We will not live in anger. We will not live in hate." I looked out at them, at Garan, at Myra, at the hunters and mothers and elders who had stood by the flame when everything tried to snuff it out. We choose something better. Slowly, uncertainly, they began to nod. A ripple of understanding passed among them, quiet but real. We could not undo the hurt Maruk had caused, but we could refuse to let it be the end of our story. That evening, we held a feast. Small, humble, but full of meaning. Fresh meat roasted over the fire. Roots and berries were passed hand to hand. Laughter, real laughter, returned, fragile but defiant. As the stars blinked open above us, Mira tugged at my sleeve, her small hand warm against my rough skin. "Will he come back?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I knelt down so we were eye to eye. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but if he does, we will welcome him." She frowned, confused. "Even after what he did?" I smiled, a slow, tired, hopeful smile. "Especially after what he did." Because that was what the fire had taught me. Not just how to survive, not just how to fight, but how to rebuild, how to forgive, how to believe, even when belief felt like the hardest choice of all. That night, as the fire blazed high and strong, I looked around at the faces lit by its glow, faces tired but unbowed, scarred but shining, and I realized we were no longer simply survivors clinging to scraps of warmth. We were a people, a tribe forged not just by fire, but by forgiveness. And in that forgiveness, we found a strength that no storm, no beast, no betrayal could ever tear apart. The days that followed the night of forgiveness were different. Not easier, not free of scars, but undeniably different. There was a steadiness now, a quiet strength woven into everything we did. When we woke, it wasn't with fear gnawing at our stomachs, but with a cautious kind of hope. When we gathered around the fire at dusk, it wasn't just for warmth, it was for belonging. The fire had survived betrayal, doubt, and even attempted destruction. And somehow, so had we. One morning, with the mist curling low over the earth like a silver river, Garan called us together. His voice, though worn with age, still carried a weight that made even the restless hunters pause. He stood near the fire, a simple, charred piece of wood in his hands. "I have seen many seasons," he said, his eyes sweeping over us. "I have seen tribes rise and fall, fires born and lost, but never have I seen a flame like this." He turned the piece of wood slowly, revealing deep marks carved into it. Symbols, rough but deliberate. "This," he said, holding it high, "is our covenant." We leaned forward, curious, hearts thudding in our chests. Garen's voice softened, roughened by emotion. "This flame is not just survival. It is not just warmth. It is memory. It is promise." He planted the carved wood firmly into the ground beside the fire, a silent sentinel. "We are no longer a people who live and die by the mercy of the cold. We are the keepers of fire, the guardians of hope." A hush fell over the clearing. The words hung in the air, sinking deep into us like roots into fertile earth. I felt Mira's small hand slip into mine, her fingers warm and trembling. I looked down at her, at the fierce, determined hope in her young eyes, and I understood. This was bigger than me, bigger than Marek, bigger even than fire itself. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something, something that would outlive us. The days grew longer, the winds softened, and the fire, our fire, grew into something sacred. Every evening, before darkness fully claimed the sky, The youngest among us would gather dry branches and twigs, offering them to the flames with small, solemn rituals. Sometimes Myra would lead them, her voice clear and earnest as she taught the newer children how to feed the fire without smothering it. The hunters began to shape stones into better tools, emboldened by the knowledge that they could work late into the night by firelight. The mothers wove stronger coverings, sang older songs, and told newer stories. Stories where the heroes were not just warriors, but those who protected, those who believed, those who kindled. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, Garan pulled me aside. We sat by the fire, just the two of us, the flames painting gold into the wrinkles of his face. "You have changed us," he said, no accusation in his tone, just quiet certainty. I shook my head. "The fire changed us," I said. Garan smiled, slow and knowing. "Fire does not choose who finds it, Karuk. It only reveals what is already burning inside." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The truth of his words lodged deep in my chest, heavier and more humbling than any praise. As the season shifted, we marked time not by the harvest, not by the hunt, but by the tending of the fire. Every ember fed, every coal coaxed back to life, every flame protected. It all became part of who we were. Our hands, once hardened by fear, were now calloused by care. Our voices, once hoarse with screaming into the void, were now strong with songs of belonging. We were no longer simply a group of survivors lost in a savage world. We were a tribe reborn in fire. Sometimes, when the fire was burning low and most had gone to sleep, I would sit alone, staring into its dancing heart. I would remember the boy I had been, desperate, stubborn, angry, hammering stones together with bloodied hands under a pitiless sky. And I would think, if that boy could see us now, if he could see Mira leading the young ones, see Garan carving new stories into wood, see the tribe laughing and building and daring to dream, he would understand. He would know it had all been worth it. Every scar, every loss, every desperate, foolish hope. Because in the end, the fire had not saved us. We had saved ourselves by believing, by forgiving, by choosing again and again to build instead of destroy. By choosing, no matter how many times we fell, to rise again with hands full of kindling and hearts full of stubborn, radiant light. And the fire, the beautiful, relentless fire, was our mirror. It burned because we did. It lived because we chose every day to keep it alive. Seasons passed. The fire never died. Through storms that ripped trees from the ground, through bitter winters that gnawed at the bones of the earth itself, the flame remained. A small, stubborn miracle we had refused to surrender. And so had we. We grew stronger. We grew wiser. We learned how to carry the fire within us, not just in our hands, but in our ways, our words, our dreams. It became more than survival. It became a story, a song, a promise. Children who had once cried from the cold now ran barefoot through the fields, laughing as their parents wove new stories into their futures. The old ones, like Garan, sat beside the fire each evening, carving the tale of our people into stone and wood, a tapestry of memory that would outlast even our own footsteps. And I, Karuk, watched it all with a heart so full it sometimes ached. Not with sorrow, not with regret, with pride, with wonder, with the quiet, humbling realization that the greatest flames are not the ones you light for yourself, but the ones you pass on. One crisp morning, long after the rains had ended and the world was dressed in gold and green, Garan called me to his side. His hair was white now, soft as ash, and his hands trembled slightly when he spoke. "You must teach them," he said, voice thin but fierce. I frowned. "I have. They know how to tend the fire." Garan shook his head, a small, knowing smile creasing his weathered face. "Not just how to tend it," he said, "how to carry it, inside them, through places where no flame can survive, except here." He touched his heart gently, as if cradling something sacred. I understood then in a way I never had before. It wasn't just about striking stones or feeding embers. It was about carrying hope across barren places, about walking through darkness and refusing to be consumed. It was about becoming the fire. That night, I gathered the tribe, old, young, weary, eager, all of us bound by the same invisible thread. We sat close, the fire at the center of us, the stars high above, listening. I spoke not of battles, not of betrayals, not of storms. I spoke of beginnings, of how, one cold and hopeless night, a boy who was too stubborn to give up had sat in the dirt and demanded light from stone and breath and sheer will. Of how every spark since that night was not just survival, it was a statement. We are here. We endure. We build. We believe. I showed them how to strike the stones, slowly, carefully, not as a trick, but as a sacred ritual. And one by one, each person knelt at the fire and tried. Some failed at first, some cursed under their breath, some laughed, embarrassed, but no one quit, not a single one. And when the first child, a small boy with hair like wild grass, coaxed a tiny spark into life, the entire tribe erupted in cheers so loud and bright it felt like the stars themselves must have heard. Tears blurred my vision as I watched. Not tears of sadness, tears of triumph, tears of knowing, beyond all doubt, that the fire would never again belong to one man or even one generation. It belonged to all of us, forever. The years stretched on like a river flowing into the horizon. Garan eventually joined the ancestors, his stories carved deep into the bones of our history. Mira grew into a fierce leader, her laughter and strength burning just as brightly as any flame. New storms came, new trials, new nights when the wind screamed and the earth shook. But the fire, our fire, never wavered, because now it burned in every heart, every hand, every story told by firelight. One evening, much older now, I sat by the flames, feeling the slow pull of time on my body. The children danced nearby, their faces glowing in the golden light, fearless and free. One little girl, bold and curious, scampered over to me. "Tell us the story," she demanded, her voice bright and stubborn. I smiled, feeling the years fall away. "Which one?" I asked, though I already knew. "The story of the first fire," she cried. Around us, others gathered, eager-eyed, expectant, and so I told them, once more, always more, of cold nights and broken stones, of stubborn hope and wounded hands, of darkness defied and light demanded, and as I spoke, I realized the story was no longer mine alone. It belonged to them now, to every spark yet to be kindled, to every heart brave enough to believe, to every soul stubborn enough to strike stone against stone and whisper into the void, "We are still here." The fire flickered in the night breeze, steady and sure. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the laughter of the children, the singing of the old ones, the heartbeat of a tribe that had learned to carry the fire in ways no storm could ever touch. I had been Karuk, the fire-bearer, Karuk, the stubborn, Karuk, the foolish, Karuk, the believer. And when my body was gone, when my name was nothing more than a thread woven into the great tapestry of time, the flame would still burn. Because it was never really about me. It was about all of us. It always had been, and it always would be.